All right. I am so excited about this talk. I actually am going to do 2 talks. This is something that I've wanted to do for years. There's never enough time for it, but today I have 30 minutes. I have 2 talks that are 15 minutes-ish. I'm so excited about this. But if I'm going to do 2 talks, I need a way to explain to people when I'm like, switching gears, as well as if you're on YouTube and you've already seen the first talk or you heard that it sucked or whatever. So you need some guide to know when the second talk is going to start. So the best I could come up with is I'm going to do this weird gesture in between the 2 talks. I'm just going to like hold that for like 15 seconds. So if you're scrolling through YouTube, just look for that. It's about 15 to 20 minutes in. Also, these slides are done by... These slides are done by my friend Susan Lin on Twitter. She's at by Susan Lin. She's great. Love these slides. I've used these quite a bit. Now, what in the world are we talking about today? So the idea here is that you're probably already a creative person and you're already doing creative work, or you're interested in getting into creative work, but there's this weird thing where you show up at a company, you're ready to go make change, and it's hard. Like, it's hard to actually ship something that you're proud of. You've got all these people working with you and they don't necessarily know design as well as you do. Hard to be heard. This is something that I've thought about for a long time. I actually teach a class on it at UX Launchpad. And so it's one of my favorite talks to give. And it all starts with, my clicker is having trouble, with 10 things. So we're going to talk about first 5 things that have to do with opening the process. So like, this is when it's like blue sky and nobody knows what's going to happen and everyone's all very excited. What I do is I start with something always called McDonald's theory. Now, if you have a bunch of friends and they love food and they don't know where to go to lunch and no one's making a decision, if you just say like, well, we could go to McDonald's, they will not like that idea. They will come up with a better one. It really, really works. But more importantly, do it at the whiteboard. Literally do this. Say, look, I heard this technique where you just do a stupid idea. It breaks the ice. I don't know. Let's say for our new app, we're going to blah. And the point is, make it bad on purpose. And then hand the pen to someone else. And then the conversation will have started. You don't have to worry about looking stupid because you're purposely saying this is probably stupid, but no big deal. Number 2, technique I use constantly, it's talking about this concept of the magic wand. I'll say, hey, let's say we had infinite time, infinite resources, infinite everything. Then what would we do? And it's interesting because it opens up people's minds in a different kind of way. Oh, I'm not worrying about a deadline. I'm worrying about, what we could do ideally. But again, more importantly, you are asking their opinion and you care what they say, and they can tell. This is building rapport with them. It's really important, which leads to number 3. Bring them with you. Designers are famous for being very kind of in their own designer bubble, having their own designer jargon, not liking engineers or marketers or executives or really anyone that's not a designer. And even then, we all fight amongst ourselves. You need to feel deep in your heart, I'm referring mostly to like engineering-based projects, but I mean, I think this works throughout the industry. You need to feel deep in your heart that sure, yes, maybe you're the creative person on the team, but everyone is creating the product together. Designers know what they know, but they frankly have a bit of a blind spot towards the business side of things, or why sometimes you have to do something for short-term gains financially, even though it's not the most beautiful thing, et cetera, et cetera. So bring them with you means making sure you really treat everyone on the team like they're all creating. If you do that, you can start doing some magical things. And this one is called Invade the Vocabulary. I love what Susan came up with for this one. It's like, I'm a dog. So the best example that I heard from this was, this is a true story. There was somebody that was starting off a brand new project. It was going to be a hardware and software device, big deal. It's going to take years to develop. The guy that I heard the story from, he's a good friend of mine, he actually went and he did that standard, let's do a week of brainstorming about what the product should be, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of this, all the heads of the different teams, like QA, dev, design, et cetera, they all got together and agreed on the core principles. So he was able to put things in like the frame rate will always be 30 frames per second when we do an animation. or we're going to use the right colors and not just like throw any color up that we want. We'll have brand guidelines and so forth. What this meant is 2 years later, when bugs were being filed, you know, I don't know if you've gone through this before, but oftentimes when a bug is filed by a designer, it's like marked as like low priority, won't fix, because it's not blocking. Here's what he did. He got the core principles put into the bug tracking software as a field. And what that's meant was, you know, he'd be like, the frame rate is really choppy here. Okay, priority 5, severity 5, won't fix. Uh-oh, hold on, core principle. And that was a great example of invading the vocabulary, because he didn't have to like beat the designer drum all the time. The engineers were doing it for him. The engineers were saying like, oh, we have to fix this one first. We all agreed about that core principle. Again, that's about invading the vocabulary, understanding how people are talking and how they're valuing features, and getting in there and actually arguing for design, and not just, you know, rolling your eyes and being frustrated. All right, finally, use the right fidelity. This is by far the biggest problem that I've seen in the last 15 years in software design. Designers love going to a meeting, maybe doing some whiteboarding, and then jumping into Photoshop. And that's nothing, there's nothing against Photoshop. It's a lot, though, oh, hang on, my thing's falling apart. There's nothing against Photoshop per se, but when you're starting off a project, you can't jump to high fidelity. You start getting weird feedback like, let's make the logo bigger, why did you use Latin text, you know, this is not popping, all that stuff. It's because you haven't built rapport with them yet. You haven't gotten them bought in yet. A sketch is polite. A sketch is very generous. A sketch is like a question mark. It's like, well, maybe, and you do the thing, and then you say, what do you think, engineer, executive, boss, client, whoever it is? If you get a sense of what they think about it, it almost doesn't matter what they think about it. It matters that you asked, and now they're bought in. And then later in the process, when they see designs that are more high fidelity, they're more bought into where you're coming from, which is huge. Most people skip that, and it's not good. All right, closing. Closing is tough. I just talked about 5 things about opening. Opening is hard in its own way. I think most of us really hate closing because the blue sky is gone. It's been replaced by a storm cloud. Everyone's grumpy. People have quit. There might be some HR violations. Like, everything sucks at the end of the process because you see the deadline coming. You're not proud of the work. Nobody is. Everyone's kind of getting frustrated. So here are some things that I've learned for closing better. Number 1, use the right fidelity. Now, you might notice I totally just said that. But that's the key that I think most people miss. Early on in the process, you need to stay low fidelity much longer than you think. Later in the process, you have to bring it. Now, look at my hand here. If this is like a Don Draper, Steve Jobs, Barnum level of pitch, and then down here is a napkin sketch, most designers just cruise right in the middle. They don't do enough low fidelity, like working with the other people, and they certainly don't do strong enough pitches at the end. And it leads to this thing where like an executive is like, tell me a story, explain why you feel strongly about this. And you're like, sure, look over my shoulder while I enable and disable layers in Photoshop. Or look, in Illustrator, I'll just navigate horizontally across a bunch of artboards. Why aren't you convinced yet? Look, I love giving talks now. I used to be super bad at public speaking. The only difference between now and then is that I practiced. You need to be taking improv classes and or taking public speaking classes and or learning prototyping skills and or motion design. I do a lot of comics. Just anything you can do to get better at communicating is time well spent. Because at the end of a project, you need to be able to really nail it. Now, there's a big insight here that I think is very important. When you come into a room and you need to present your work, most people don't care. You're going to have some percentage of people that are on your side. You're going to have some percentage of people that just hate you, maybe, hopefully not. And then you've got this like 80 or 90% in the middle that they don't know. They're going to go with their gut. And if they see somebody show up and they clearly have not prepared, think about this. It becomes the most socially acceptable, safe thing in the world to say, I have some concerns about this. Because everyone's feeling it, because you're not doing a good job pitching. On the other hand, if you show up and you know what you're talking about, and you're just like, I think we should do this, and I thought about this, and da-da-da, and you're on it, it becomes the safest thing in the world to be like, I think you've got this. Don't lose something because you know, of like a self-inflicted error. Lose it because it's actually a bad idea, not because you haven't prepared. And that's all about using the right fidelity. Next, bite your tongue. I'm very bad at this, but we say in businesses all the time, we say this thing that I think is half right. We say, people are our most important asset. And of course, that's technically accurate, because if you had no people, you can't run a business, obviously. But I think it's missing the point, because it leads to rock star culture. It leads to this idea like, oh, we need to hire someone. Let's hire a rock star. We need to hire 3 people. Let's hire 3 rock stars. Ah. I've actually worked on teams that had these rock stars, and it was a disaster, because they knew they were rock stars, they were hard to work with, messed up the team. Great products come from great teams. We all agree with that. Great teams come from great relationships. Not great people, which is what we always like to say. We like to hire A people. You need to work on the teamwork. And so when you're hating on marketing, when you're hating on executives, when you're hating on engineers, you are breaking down those connections and those relationships. You are going to ship a worse product, full stop. When you use a great product, it's because everybody liked each other enough to get something great done. When you use something broken, it was probably because of silos and people not liking each other. So bite your tongue. Now, the tugboat. The tugboat is one of my best rhetorical tricks when I'm working with engineers. If I were to ask you right now, is this a good boat, true or false? You probably have an idea, like yes or no. But it's a trick question because you don't know the problem it's trying to solve. You can't answer this question until you know what problem I'm asking it to solve. So with the tugboat, if I'm like, yeah, I'm looking for a boat that goes super fast, you'd be like, no, that is a bad boat. But if I said, hey, I'm looking for a boat that can pull other boats, you'd be like, yeah. Okay, but think about that. The same design was good or bad based on the parameters we put on the thing it was trying to solve. Designers fall into this trap all the time. We look at like, ooh, I like the grid, I like the type that he chose, it's a great design. Well, actually, I've seen this firsthand. Many times the design that the designers like personally is the one that loses the company a lot of money. You can't call it good design if it's losing the company money. I was at a company where they showed me 5 banner ads, and they're like, John, rank them in order of the one that you like the most to the one that you like the least, and it was a perfect sweep. The one that I liked the most lost the company 20% revenue. The one that I liked second most lost like 15%, and the one that I hated made the company the most money. You need to factor in the problem you're trying to solve, which for most companies is make money. So you can't just be like, well, I find it garish, so I do not like it. It doesn't work. You have to understand trade-offs. There is no such thing as the perfect design. There are only trade-offs, so you have to understand what they are. I had an example. I was designing Office for Windows Phone, and we had to figure out where to put the ribbon, all of those features, where to put them. And my idea was put them all away. There's just 3 dots in the bottom right corner. If you tap it, then you get the ribbon. But a lot of the people I was working with was saying, well, why don't we put some features down there? Why don't we have like 5 buttons down there, and if you can't find the thing that you want there, then you tap the dots. The thing is, I was optimizing for less clutter. Everyone else, the PMs, they were optimizing for fewer taps. Neither one of us was right or wrong. We just had to figure out which trade-off was best. Now, this is a technique called push till it breaks. Sometimes you've been on a project for like 3 months, 6 months, a year, whatever. Everybody knows where the final disagreements are. Everybody knows, yep, these 3 people think we should do X. These 3 people think we should do Y. They're just not agreeing. They've done the best they can. They're just not making resolution. Here's what I do. You make one last meeting, and you say, we're going to decide in this meeting. And then you pitch really hard on the one that everybody knows that you like, but then you pitch equally hard on the other one. You give them both fair say. And then, as a designer, I like to recede into the background and let the team talk and not try to push it anymore. Why? Because this is a 51-49, meaning you might have a strong opinion, but if it was obvious, they would have chosen one already. So you might either win or lose. Well, if you win, it's much better to do it gracefully by not pushing too hard, not burning bridges. Just let the team get to that decision on their own. More importantly, though, if you lose, people need to see how you lose. I just spoke with an engineer. He's a guy I've been working with really closely at Twitter for the last year. And he goes, yeah, John, that design that you're working on, we're going to get back to you and tell you how hard it's going to be to do, technically. And then you can tell us how important it really is. And I said, but wouldn't any designer say everything is important at all times? He said, no, John, that's why you're different. we know that if we say to you it's going to take 6 months, your answer is going to be, okay, what's our plan B? And you'll work with us to figure out the next step. When a development team knows that you're actually going to work with them, you have a lot more credibility and you can push things through that maybe you couldn't if you're trying to channel Steve Jobs and just complain about everything. When people like Mike Montero, who I have a lot of respect for, when people like him says like, only you can save the world because you are the designer and you're the only thing stopping the company from doing a bad thing, I just think it's inaccurate. He is breeding a bunch of designers that no one wants to work with when you follow that. All right, last thing, braiding. Braiding is this idea that you are apart before you are together, then you go apart again. A lot of teams, they're like, let's just jump into a brainstorm, it'll be great. What could go wrong? Well, I read this book called Quiet. It's about introverts. It's a great book. And what they found is that when you throw a bunch of people into a brainstorm, it locks into sort of a standard power hierarchy. The person who's been at the company for the longest time, who's most comfortable in groups, who's most extroverted, and quite literally is most sociopathic, this is like a true thing, they are the ones that get the most out of a brainstorm because they get to lead it and it becomes a cult of personality. Don't you think we should do X, Y, and Z? And there's like 7 shy but very smart people in the back of the room that don't want to say anything. So the meeting just becomes sort of like, well, let's just go with what that loud person said. On the other hand, again, I learned this in this book. On the other hand, if you get people to come to a meeting and you leave 5 minutes for everyone to write what they actually think about the topic, or like do sticky notes of what they think the features should be first, and then you slowly get those groups into like, okay, everybody pair up, and then we'll do the broader brainstorm. It gets more introverted people into the game, and they found scientifically it leads to more ideas, broader ideas, better ideas. It's just better in every way. So braiding's great. All right, so these are the 10 things that I just talked about. Now, when I first did this talk, I believed that I was talking about courage. The courage to be wrong, the courage to bring people into the design process that aren't technically designers. I thought I was talking about courage, but then I realized I'm actually just talking about humility. We just need more humility. I thought this was a call to arms to be courageous. It's actually a call to arms against rock star culture. Now, these are the Beatles. I love this slide. If you know anything about the Beatles or any creative endeavor or have ever worked on a team, you know that the Beatles were not successful because they had more talent than average. That's actually not it. If you do the math, if you take any 4 people and you count the number of relationships between them, you see this. This is what caused the Beatles to succeed and then eventually to break up. When they first started out, these 6 relationships between these 4 men were really strong. They put in a lot of hours and practiced a lot. And the collaboration, that word, that's why we're here today. The collaboration was amazing. By the time they broke up, let's think about that for a second. Think about it through the lens of the way recruiters talk about hiring rock stars. By the time they broke up, did they forget how to play the guitar? Of course not. Did they forget how to write amazing lyrics? No. Did they like forget how to be rock stars? No. And the answer is right there in front of us. They were too rock starry. They forgot how to work with each other. That was the difference. That's why the Beatles had trouble at the end. Not that they lost the talent, but that they lost this, the collaboration. Now, if you've ever played on any sort of sports team, you found the same thing. In high school, I played with a guy who said, look, I know how to do an amazing soccer team. Here's what we do. We're just going to clone me 11 times. There'll be 12 of me. That'd be great. And he wasn't even the best person on the team, but he made a good point. And that is, the teamwork between like one Borg mind would be pretty unstoppable. So think about that on your own team. Let's just say, for example, that you work with about 11 people. I don't know, might be less, might be more. Let's just say it is 11 people. If you work with 11 people and you do the math and you take this group of 12 and you count the number of connections between everybody, it is 66 connections. 66 connections. This is kind of crazy. So again, as I was saying before, when you use software that you think is really good, it's that these 66 connections were strong. However, if you have had the bad luck to work with someone that thinks they are a rock star, what you get out of this person is, okay, fine, yes, maybe they're better at Photoshop than the average bear, but they bring 11 toxic relationships into this diagram. That's a pretty sobering thought. So when you're hiring people, I would like us to maybe move beyond this thinking that says, okay, we only hire rock stars, but instead start thinking about how people work together. Now I want to leave you with one last comment, one last quote before I go to this next talk. Maya Angelou says something that I think fits really well into design or any kind of collaboration, and that is this. No one remembers what you said, no one remembers what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. Thank you. All right, so this is the second talk. This one is the Jon Bell Super Specific Tactical Mega Bonus Power Talk of Delight. I've given the talk that I just gave. I've given it before. I have this class that I teach. I've done this a lot. I think about it a lot when I manage people. This is basically all I ever think about. But I have a couple more tactical things I want to blaze through. This one's faster than the first one. First, a tactical thing that you can do. You should analyze your actual free time. Some people only have a couple meetings a day, and you are very lucky. Other people, though, we're all stressed out. Here's a technique. Do this. Do a thing that goes Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Now you'll notice mine says 8 to 3. I get in early and leave early, so mine's a little bit off. But do this. Find all the recurring meetings that you should really go to. And in this case, 12, yeah, that's lunch. But find your recurring meetings, and then this is the part no one understands. Boop. Every meeting has a shadow. If you get out of a meeting at 12, or not 12, let's say 2, you are not going to do great work at 2:01. It's not going to happen. It takes some time to get into the groove. If you do this, you can actually call out where your actual big chunks of time are. And hopefully you can start moving meetings into blocks. That way the shadows don't, they can, what's the thing I'm looking at? So on Monday, if you look right after lunch, see how the shadow goes into another shadow because another meeting is coming up? That is time that's basically lost for doing deep work. So if you put your meetings together in a good way, it can help. And this is what I was talking about before about grading. I am crazy about my calendar. I don't even want to say on film what I do with my calendar, but let's just say I have a lot of downtime to do real work because I push back on meetings a lot. All right. I have another technique. I call it 3 years, 2 weeks. This is an understanding of how engineering works with design. I will say to my engineers, hey, we have different incentives, and let's make sure we can talk about that. Now, it is my goal to think 3 years out. Now, pause. In this moment, the engineer hates me so much because that sounds horrible. They have stuff to do. They have to get things done in quicker sprints. So when they hear a designer be like, so I'm going to go dark for 3 years, I'll see you on the flip side, it's not good. So unpause. Then I very quickly say, but it is my job to not only think 3 years out about what this product should look like, but to be able to convert that all the way back down to what our next 2 weeks looks like. Now pause. In that moment, they're thinking, I can work with this fellow. That is a really important technique, a really important thing to tell people that you work with. I need to be thinking further out, but I will never block you if I can possibly help it. And if they can hear that, then they understand where you're coming from and you're building rapport. Now you might be wondering, how in the world are you having a conversation like that with an engineer? Because that's certainly not how I talk to my engineers. Did I do something wrong? All right, that's fine. Slides are just me with Sharpie. We're good. So you might be wondering, how in the world do I talk to engineers that way? Well, what is that? So the slide a second ago, it said, how do you like to work? This is something that I learned at Frog. I actually sent out an email at Frog, and it said, subject line, I wish interaction designers blank. And I got 50 responses of what people at Frog Design wished interaction designers did. I printed them all out, we put them up, and we all chatted about it. It was amazing. So that is why everyone's labels today say, I love it when designers do blah. I found that if you just say to somebody, hey, can you just describe your favorite designer? And not a person, I mean like a magic wand designer. Maybe a designer they've never met, but what would that look like? They really open up. So literally the first time I ever talked to my engineers, they're like, let's all get into a group of 8 people and just talk. I'm like, nope. That's going to happen in 3 days because first I have to do my one-on-ones with everyone. And I talk with each engineer and I say, look, I do this weird thing. It's super group therapy sounding, but let's just go with it. I say, what would your perfect designer look like? What would that working relationship look like? If you can think 3 months out, like how would this go? And an interesting thing happens. They get this look on their face. They're like, wow. Like they're thinking about what perfection looks like. And they're just kind of happy. And it's good. And then they say things like, I really like a designer who can understand technical constraints and really work around those. That is code for, I just worked with a designer that doesn't understand technical constraints and did not work around that. they're telling you their baggage and their damage. It's like a first date. You're starting to get a sense of like, what's working for this person and what's not. It's really, really important. So just, and again, it can feel awkward, kind of like the McDonald's theory thing, but if you just literally say, like, I know it sounds weird, but it might work. What I found is that people do think it's weird for about 5 seconds, and then they're just super excited anyone's asking their opinion. I always think someone's gonna be like, I don't know, I'm easy. No one's easy. Everybody has an opinion about this, how they like to work, do they like emails, do they not, do they like meetings, do they like stand-ups? It's just good to ask this stuff. Now, oh no, I have the videos that I can't show. Can I have any technical help? So I do this thing called 2-minute videos, and it's literally me just scrawling out comics and then talking over the top of it and sending it out. Now I learned this at Frog, and if we can't do it, it's fine. We'll just send it online or something. But it's really fascinating because you're like, you see an email from Jon Bell, and it's like, hey, everybody, here's what I'm thinking about the new project I'm doing. And you're like, sure, I guess I'll watch a 2-minute video. It's only 2 minutes. And then I try to simultaneously be low fidelity, so it's not too scary, but high fidelity in what I'm trying to say. This is one of the very first ones that I sent at Twitter. And hopefully the sound is going to work for me. Let's see here. My name is Jon Bell, and I'm no sound. And I like to do these things called 2-minute design videos. Now, usually what it helps me do is it takes ideas and it makes them much more compelling because it's sort of like, look, I've thought about it, I've come up with an answer, it's a 2-minute video, enjoy. But that's not actually what I'm doing with this video. What I'd like to do with this video is let everybody know I'm working on emerging market stuff. All right, so I'm going to cut it off there. But that video was me humbly saying to the team, I'm new. I do this weird thing where I do comics and talk over them, and I need your help because I was working on emerging market stuff at Twitter, which touches everything at Twitter, and I needed feedback. It was only 2 minutes. It's kind of charming just to get this weird like comic in your mailbox. This is by far, it's like my biggest secret weapon. That's totally, totally helpful. So I'm going to leave you with one last comment, and it's about how to do presentations. It's a two-parter, but it's all about presentations. One weird trick for presentations. Ready? Here we go. Practice. I call this the advice that no one ever listens to. People believe that they will sound wooden if they practice, which I think is crazy. You sound wooden when you show up and you don't know what you're talking about. That's the wooden thing. I don't understand where this mythology came from. I think people think that someone like a Steve Jobs just like appeared being good at this stuff, but no, like the people that are really good are the ones that practice a lot. So practice more. I'm not talking about practicing your talk once or 3 times. This talk that I'm giving right now, I've probably said it in its entirety over 100 times. I'm talking tons of practice. And if you're thinking like, well, I don't want to do that, well, welcome to the bell curve. The people that are doing that do better. I started getting better jobs and getting put on better projects and being trusted with more stuff as I got better at doing this sort of thing. And I certainly was not born with this. I really had to practice. So, last comment. How to end like you mean it, which is very meta, because I'm almost done. What most people do, we've all seen this, we've all done it, we've all been there. You're doing the presentation, you don't even know what's coming on the next slide because you haven't practiced. So you do that thing where you're like, spacebar. Right, so now I'm going to talk about, and then you talk about it for a little bit, and you're like, spacebar. Oh, right, yeah, and I just talked about this, sorry, okay, spacebar. And then you fall off the cliff. You hit the spacebar one too many times because you're on the last slide, and this happens. It pops from presentation mode to edit mode, and then you see an embarrassing iMessage from your spouse. So we've all done it, but it's so bad. If you were ever at a concert and the band was like playing the final song and then the music stopped and the guy is just like, I guess I'm out of lyrics. It wouldn't be good. And yet that's what everyone's doing. So if you just like don't do this, you're way ahead of everybody. So here's how you do your conclusion. Write it out longhand. Write out a paragraph. Be like, these are the things that I'm going to say at the end. And then practice it a lot. Because it should only take you like a minute. So you should be able to practice like 30 times in 30 minutes and you should have it, nailed. The thing about a conclusion is that everyone is just really excited for you to be done. So you can use this time to say 1 or 2 like final kind of good points, and your cadence kind of slows down a little bit, and you sort of add a pregnant pause, and you know what your last slide is, so you can look really amazing when you hit that last slide, and you can just say, thank you. We have 5-ish minutes for QA. Does anyone have a question for QA? Yes, hello.
So one of the things we talked about was your idea that you're really going to for it. And you described the other people.
Yeah, and that slide, if I can unpack it. By the way, the question for those that didn't hear it was saying the push it till it breaks slide, where I was talking about arguing one point and then the other point with equal vigor. You know, let's talk more about that. The key there is that by the end of a process, everyone already knows all the details and everybody knows where you stand. So if you come in and you're like, we should do my thing because I'm amazing, and this other one is stupid and everyone is stupid and I'm better than them, then there's nothing good can come of it. You surprise people when you say, okay, now I'm going to play devil's advocate. There are good things about this other thing, and I'm going to go for it. I'm going to talk about all those good things and also try to call out the pros and cons of both. When you're that fair and then you shut up and you let the team go where it's going to go, you have that much more gunpowder the next time you want to fight hard. And it's funny, there are cases where I'll talk to my engineering team. I'm like, look, I feel like I have to die on this sword. And it actually means something when I'm not Chicken Little, like dying on my sword. I'm combining two things, aren't I? But when I don't try to like say, no, this time I mean it about every topic, then it actually means something when I actually have to do that. And it happens. Great question. Thank you. Any other questions? I'm bad at QA, so try to mess me up. This will be great for everybody. Yes. So the question was, you ask about the perfect designer to the engineer, but do you ever flip it? A really interesting thing happens in that scenario. Some people do that. Some people say, well, yeah, this has been great. Describe your favorite engineer. Like, what does that look like? And I go, they asked, they reciprocated. That is a good thing for me to know just about how this relationship is going to go. And then I say some stuff and we're great. Sometimes people don't ask at all, and I don't like. It's not like I like hate them, but I keep that in mind. That's just another data point. But I'd say like most people do ask because it's just the polite thing to do. And yeah, like I said, even if they don't ask, it's just a good thing to know about working with them. If that makes any sense. I'm making that sound really dire, like they're on my bad list. It's not like that. It's just more. I think the more you can talk to someone on a personal level, the more you just get good at that rapport. And just to be super cynical about it, at the end of a process, when I need a developer to work all weekend to realize a final thing that I really feel strongly about, hopefully we're friends at that point, and I can make that request, and he will do it. So it's all kind of a long game just to be a good person, so you can hopefully get out better designs and be the kind of person someone wants to work with. Any other questions? We have some more time. Yes. I liked your pitch, by the way. Any other one? So the question was, do you have suggestions for like the day-to-day rapport? What I've found is that if you kick things off asking and genuinely caring about how people work, your friendship has begun, like a very real friendship. Like you know that they have children and they would ask you to appear and that sort of thing. And so hopefully if things are going well, it's actually really natural. And what I find is that hey, why don't we go ahead and set up a weekly cadence? Those meetings, in my opinion, or in my experience, they start to go away because we're comfortable enough with each other that like at 1 a.m. we're sending each other emails like, I had an idea. And like it gets a little bit more organic, and a little bit more friendly, and a lot less sort of structured. So I don't have a direct answer as much as just rapport just kind of helps everything get better, which helps it from the beginning. Yes?
already established relationship, like taking that on there?
That's a great point. I don't. I mean, there's always like the retrospectives where like, okay, we shipped the thing, everything went wrong, let's talk about it. I have a story to tell. This is an embarrassing story, which is the best kind. I set forth the design, explained all the reasons for it, and this developer that I love working with, she's so talented and so smart, and we just have great, great connection. We play cards together, everything's great. But I got grumpy with her in a bug. I was basically like, oh, it was over chat. I was like at the playground with my kids, and she was asking questions. She's like, we were thinking we should go another way, and I was essentially writing back and being like, do it. There's more discussion, but I was getting grumpy. And on the bug, I ended up writing just an apology. I was like, hey, I believe in fair and open communication. I was not fair. That was stupid. I apologize, and let's kick off a new project so I can do better on that one. And so that was an example of like it wasn't an official thing that the business told me to do. It was more like I was being a jerk. It's right there on the bug, so anyone can go see me like apologizing. And I thought that was a great example of like by me doing it, we're cool again. We just hung out yesterday at the beach. It's great. But it was hard for me to write that email. I think it'd be hard for anybody. So I think it's just an ongoing thing. Frank, I've been married for 17 years. I've been married a long time. And, anyone in a marriage or in a relationship knows the whole, like, you're going to fight, but it's how you deal with the fight that, makes you healthy. And that's what I found with my engineers. We fight, but hopefully you're a big enough person to admit it and kind of move on from there. Not sure if I answered your question, but I got to tell an embarrassing story at least. Okay, maybe one more question? Yes. What is my approach for handling a known rock star in the group? I think as soon as you paint someone with a brush, oh, that's just the such and such person, or oh, that person thinks they're a rock star, you've sort of already lost. Like if you admit to yourself like that person's a jerk and thinks they're too great, you're probably not even going to try anymore. So I think it's just kind of more organic. Each new person that comes on the team, I think it's really important as soon as possible to like find a way to socially understand them and to kind of get that relationship going. And yeah, we've all experienced people, you reach out to them, you try to be close with them, you try to work with them, and they're just tough. And for me, I think it's a mental trick. You never let yourself say, they think they're a rock star, I can't work with them. You just keep trying. You just do your best. I think if you're doing that and the rest of the team is doing it and they're not reciprocating, things will work themselves out. I've seen plenty of people that show up, they think they're amazing, they talk about how amazing they are, they're not there for very long. Compared to the other people that are more, modest. So, great question. Great. Thank you very much. Have a good day.